Well, God speaks to Samuel and says, look, it's no good you keeping moping about and just hoping that things are going to change for Saul. They're not going to. Stop mourning for him, stop grieving for him. I have chosen a new king. And so God sends Samuel to a place called Bethlehem. Bethlehem literally means the house of bread. Now, there's a little bit of backstory here, because Bethlehem was where a lady called Naomi had lived. And whilst its name means house of bread, there'd been a famine. This was back during the time of the Judges, probably not that long ago. And Naomi and her husband had left Bethlehem and gone to Moab to escape the famine and to find food. The irony that the house of bread provides no bread. When Naomi gets to Moab, they've got two sons. Their names literally mean weakness and disease. I suspect that's actually a sort of a pun, a bit of wordplay, but it doesn't sound great, does it? Well, the two sons marry, and they marry Moabite girls. But sadly, these two sons, losing the names, remember, get sick and die, leaving their wives, Orpah and Ruth, widows. And also, Naomi's husband has died, so she's a widow too. Well, Naomi decides that it is time to return and gets word that the famine may be ending, and that harvest may be coming in Bethlehem. So she sets off back home. And the two daughters-in-law come with her. But on the way, she encourages them to return to their own people. And Orpah eventually agrees, but Ruth refuses. She says, no, your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. She turns her back on Moab and identifies with God's people, the people of Israel, and with God, with Yahweh himself. But when they get to Bethlehem, it's harvest time. And Naomi sends Ruth out to do something called gleaning. They are poor people now. They don't have anything. They've come from outside. But the law permitted, in fact strongly encouraged, the landowners not to harvest right to the edge of the fields, but to leave some grain so that the poorer people who had nothing could go and share in the harvest. And that's what Ruth does. She ends up at a field belonging to a man called Boaz. And the story tells us, the book of Ruth tells us, that he treated her kindly. Something about her stood out to him. And so he treats her kindly. And Naomi realizes that this man, Boaz, is a relative of hers. And more importantly, of her first husband. And the law also provided for widows. There's this idea of a kinsman redeemer. A kinsman, a relative, a redeemer who buys back, redeems. And the idea was this, that if a wife dies, so if a husband dies and his wife hasn't had children yet, then a relative, usually starting with brothers, but obviously there's none of them left, will step in to become the husband. that she becomes, in a sense, his wife, but also at the same time, he is standing in the place of, he's fulfilling the role of his relative, of his brother, so that in fact the offspring, the descendants, are his. And it's all to do with both the protection of widows and provision for them, but also making sure that land and property and inheritance stayed in the family, that the family continued, that the name continued, because that mattered as well. So, Naomi sets up this sort of clandestine meeting between Ruth and Boaz at night, and he very clearly wants to step in to take this role. He seems to love Ruth. But he says, but there's actually somebody who's a little bit closer, a closer relation. We need to see if he's willing first. And so they go to the elders, and Boaz says that he's willing. In fact, he starts saying that there's property available, but with this property comes Ruth. And the other relation, the closer relation, he wants the property, but he doesn't want the wife. And so he turns it down. And Ruth marries Boaz. And we're told that Boaz and Ruth have descendants. This is why it gets important. They're here in Bethlehem, and their descendants are Obed and then Jesse. And it's to Jesse's family that Samuel is sent. When Samuel gets there, and it's all undercover, there's a little bit of secrecy about why he's doing this. But he asks to see Jesse's sons. And he looks at them each in turn, and God says, no, this is not the one. Because God looks on the heart, not on the strength or the appearance of valor, the greatness of the man, how tall he is. Remember, Saul had been head and shoulders above all the others. And yet his heart had turned out to be wrong. But, well, Samuel's seen all of the sons, and none of them are the right one. And this leaves him wondering, is there a mistake here? Have I heard God wrong? But he checks, have you got any other sons? And Jesse says, well, there is. My youngest, he's still a lad, teenager. He's out looking after the sheep. He acts as a shepherd for me, looking after my sheep up on the hillside. So Jesse sends to him. And when this lad, David, arrives, God says to Samuel, this is the one. And Samuel anoints David's head with oil, demonstrating that he is the king. He is to be the king. He is the anointed one. That's where the word Messiah comes from. Its roots are in that the Hebrew word for being anointed. And so when we talk about Jesus as the Messiah, we're actually saying that he is the heir of David. He is the anointed one. But each of these kings was a Messiah in that sense. Each of the kings would be an anointed one. But pointing forward to the one who is fully and truly anointed, the true and better Messiah, the true and better David. So David is anointed as the heir, as the true coming king. Not long after most of Jesse's sons are called up to battle because the Philistines have attacked. And so they go to fight the Philistines. The Philistines have a man who's a giant, really big and tall. I think described as 9 cubits. I'm not quite sure how that translates into sort of modern sort of weights and measures. But he was tall, taller than Saul. And he turns up, and he comes out each day and he calls to the Israelites and says, will you send one of your people as a champion to fight for you, to fight against me? I'll fight for the Philistines, your champion can fight for you. And I'm sure the implication is that he expects Saul himself, the king of the giant of the Israelites, the champion, to come out and fight, but Saul does not. And he says, if you win, we will be your slaves, but if we win, you will be our slaves. Well, this goes on every day, and the Israelites are afraid. No one is ready to come out and fight. Until one day, Jesse sends David to take supplies, to take food to his brothers, and to get a report of what's happening, how things go in the battle. And David arrives and he hears this giant Goliath mocking God's people, taunting God's people. And he says, what's going on? Why won't anybody go out to fight him? And he says, I will. His brothers are dismissive of him, but he says, no, I trust in God. Word gets to Saul. And Saul's in a bind here, isn't he? Because he is someone volunteering. Does he really want to send this young lad out to fight? So Saul has a plan. He gets his own armour and offers it to David. And gets David to wear it. Now, David is still young. He hasn't grown into himself. And Saul is, remember, this man who is a giant himself, head and shoulders above the rest of the people, probably well over 6 foot tall. Big and strong as a warrior. And the one Samuel says that Saul's armour did not fit David. I think there's a few things going on there. I think it's certainly obvious that Saul is not just wanting to protect David. Any armour would do. But he is wanting to make sure that if David wins, he's hedging his bets here. If David loses, never mind. If David wins, it's the one in Saul's armour that wins. It may even appear that it is Saul. It is Saul's victory. He wants David to stand in, not just for God's people, but to stand in for himself, but on his terms. And the armour doesn't fit, not just that it's the wrong size for him, but it is not fitting, it is not right for David to stand in Saul's place. He is coming in the name of the Lord. He is coming in his own right in that respect. And so David refuses the armour. And David instead goes without his armour, and he takes his sling. By the way, sling shots would be used as one of the weapons in a battle. He gets 5 stones from a brook nearby, and he goes and he approaches Goliath, the giant, and the giant mocks him. Who do you think you are? And David insists, I come in the name of the Lord, in the name of Yahweh, the covenant-keeping God. And with one single swing of the sling, he takes aim and fires, and The stone hits Goliath right in the forehead, knocking him down to the ground. David rushes forward, takes Goliath's own sword and cuts off his head. Goliath is defeated. The Philistines flee the battlefield, of course not keeping the terms that had been agreed at the start, but they are defeated. And Saul welcomes David into his entourage. David has been victorious. Just pause there and make a note of something here. I've often heard this story retold, this historical event retold. And the lesson we're meant to learn is that we too can fight our own giants, the things that we fear. But actually that's to misunderstand things and to place ourselves in the wrong place in the story. One of the things we need to be doing in the story is working out where are we meant to place ourselves in the story. And the reality is that we are with the Israelite army at best. Because remember, David, the anointed one, David, the Messiah type figure, is pointing us forward to the true and better David, the true and better Messiah, to Jesus. It is Jesus who faces the giant, the Goliath of sin and death. And our part is we get to cheer him on, and we get to join in the rout, the mopping up exercise of putting to death our sinful desires afterwards. Whilst Saul immediately and initially welcomes David, David becomes part of the household, becomes eventually a warrior, one of Saul's champions, one of Saul's generals, and he wins great victories in battle. And the people begin to sing his praises, and Saul hears them singing. Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands, and Saul becomes jealous. And he tries to kill David. And so eventually David has to go on the run, and he is in hiding. And Saul searches for him. Much of the story of 1 Samuel is about how this happens. Not the rest of the story. Until one day, the Philistines have regrouped. They go into battle with Saul again. Samuel has died. And they're on the battlefield. Saul, this bitter, hardened, jealous man who has not heard from God except to hear his own fate. He goes into battle. He and his sons are killed. The Israelites flee, and the Philistines have the upper hand. It's a Saul's life. We've been talking about tragedy and comedy. Saul's life ends as a tragedy. Desperately sad, this man who had so much seemingly going for him, but in fact his heart was not right with God. There is a warning to each of us not to be like Saul. But also that there's a reminder of the kings that we choose, the kings that we look for. Not the literal kings, but what we allow to have authority and power in our lives that can at times seem on the outside to be good and strong and reliable and helpful. And you know what those rulers, what those authorities, what those powers, what those kings are. But they will all fail. They will all let us down. They will all lead to tragedy. So the call of the gospel, the call of God's big story is not to put our hope in false kings and emperors, but to put our hope in the Lord and to put our hope in the true King, King Jesus.